JoJo's is notorious for its power scaling matchups and ranking of who's the strongest. However, when rewatching part 4, I thought of something that is probably not spoken about enough considering how interesting it might be. And that is, realistically speaking, how hard would it be to catch Kira Yoshikage? Part 4 introduces us to Kira Yoshikage, the man behind the stand Killer Queen. Outwardly, he craves nothing more than a quiet life, but beneath that facade lies a predator. His calm demeanor hides a dark compulsion, a fetishistic obsession with women's severed hands. This is made possible by stand Killer Queen, which can erase a victim and every trace of the crime in an instant, including removing bodies with no trace of fingerprints and incriminating objects so completely that even the most skilled investigators would be left clueless. The keyword there is most investigators. As the title suggests, today's video is about what happens when the world's greatest detective, L Lawliet from Death Note, is given the task of catching Kira Yoshikage. This is way more complicated than one might think. But before we start, if you like this type of content and want to see more, subscribe. The goal is 15k. Thank you. To start, we need to split this into scenarios. The first scenario would be if L had help from the Morioh team, and the second scenario would be if L had to solve this case alone. The results will be a lot different depending on which scenario he takes. Although, let's see how these events will unfold, starting from scenario 1. Jotaro's visit to Morioh begins the same way. Joseph's Hermit Purple captures a photograph hinting at a dangerous presence in the town, and even something greater lurking in the shadows. Recognizing the seriousness of the threat, and with the wealth of the Joestar family behind him, Jotaro seeks out the one mind capable of untangling something this unusual. L Lawliet, the world's greatest detective, who himself has the resources and reputation to operate on that level, as both are technically billionaires. The first case comes with Anjiro Katagiri, or better known as Angelo, and his stand Aqua Necklace. In the anime and manga, the fight escalates because Angelo strikes when the rain falls, but with L involved, the encounter will look a little different. By analyzing the conditions, a water-based stand which he heard from Josuke, Angelo's profile and the forecast of rain, L would conclude that Angelo intends to launch a mass attack during that time. But with L's prediction, it allows the group to counter Angelo before he attacks. And some might argue that with L by their side, Angelo could be caught even before this point. And that is reasonable, but for convenience of the scenario, it's better that the confrontation still happens here. Because this is the battle where L would witness a stand's mechanics in action. He could get information from Jotaro about how stands function and that, but a first-hand experience would allow for a better understanding most likely, although he still can't see stands themselves. Moving on. While Josuke and the others continue facing new stand users, L's attention turns to something the locals overlook: Morioh's disappearance rate. For a town its size, the number of missing persons is absurd. The police see unrelated cases with no evidence connecting them to any greater evil, but L interprets it differently. The evidence is too consistent. To him, the lack of evidence points to a mind operating behind it, or even multiple minds. The case shifts when Koichi and Rohan return from the hidden alley with information that changes everything. They explain that they encountered the ghost of Reimi Sugimoto, murdered 15 years ago, who revealed that Morioh still hides a serial killer responsible for countless unseen deaths. She knows this because she has watched the souls of Kira's victims pass into the alley for over a decade. L can't see her himself, but he takes the testimony seriously. Reimi's murder, the only case with a body, aligns with the spike in disappearance 15 years ago. From this point, L begins treating the vanishings as the work of one evolving killer who perfected a method of leaving no trace. With the case reframed, L develops a profile of the killer. Based on the ritualistic nature of the crimes and their longevity, he deduces they are looking for a man in his 30s to 40s, highly organized, socially unobtrusive, and obsessive in his routines. His need for control suggests he hides comfortably within ordinary life, perhaps as a quiet office worker who draws no suspicion. For the first time, the investigation has direction. Instead of waiting for the killer to make a mistake, they can actively search for people who fit this pattern. To narrow down on this profile, L conducts a systematic review of Morioh's residence. Employment histories, public records, and lifestyle details are sorted through, narrowing thousands of names down to only a handful of suspects. This creates a manageable list for L to investigate. At this stage, L uses an ability that was used as a gimmick for Josuke and Okuyasu to get quick change, Shigechi's stand Harvest. Rather than using it randomly, L directs Harvest to tell and observe the list of suspects. Then units are sent out to monitor behavior, routines, and reactions to controlled probes. But the moment comes when one of the Harvests is approaching Kira and is instantly destroyed after being witnessed, without visible cause or action as well. This isn't a coincidence like the time Shigechi picked up the wrong lunch bag. The destroyed Harvest confirms that Kira is a dangerous stand user who can erase victims with ease. The search has reached certainty. As a side note, in canon, Kira Yoshikage's father, repeatedly interferes and makes new enemies for the Morioh team. However, L closes this gap quickly. Once Adam Half-Father is discovered, the photograph is treated as hazardous evidence and immediately contained. But that said, due to the killer's nature, L might not investigate Kira's home as he does not know what would happen if they enter. But with Kira identified, the final challenge is understanding and countering Killer Queen, which they still have a vague understanding of. L insists on confronting him in a controlled environment where contingencies are in place. Jotaro insists on acting as a bait, and for once L agrees, because Star Platinum offers the greatest chance of surviving an initial attack. Josuke provides immediate healing, Okuyasu blocks escape routes, and Koichi is positioned to suppress secondary threats like Shi-Heart attack, although they will not know about this at this stage. When Kira attempts to throw Jotaro off guard and detonate his bag when throwing it at him, Jotaro withstands the explosion long enough for Josuke to heal him instantly from the minor injuries. For Kira, the psychological impact is devastating. His supposedly perfect weapon has failed. That hesitation is enough for the team to close in. Okuyasu cuts off retreat, Jotaro counters at close range, and Kira is overwhelmed. As the final moments approach, L speaks from a set of speakers, telling Kira that they know he is the killer and to surrender at once. Now, before moving on to scenario 2, you might be wondering why this outcome is different. In the manga, Kira's capture required a chain of coincidences: Shigechi's mistake, Yoshihiro's errors, and Hayato's interferences. With L present, the process of narrowing down the suspect at the stage of Sugimoto Reimi's discovery would be drastically different, and how he uses Shigechi's stand as surveillance. But all of this assumes L had help. What if he didn't? What if he faced Morioh alone? Without the Joestars or the Speedwagon Foundation pulling him in, there's no reason L would step foot into Morioh by chance. But there is one path that makes sense. While investigating the Kira case in Death Note, L's team compiled nationwide databases of missing persons that came from Japan. And yes, before you say anything, I know that the Kira case technically would have taken place way after the events in Part 4, but just go with it for the sake of this video. So, in that sea of data, one town would stand out. For its size, the town of Morioh has a wildly disproportionate number of disappearances, especially of women, and L notices immediately and decides to investigate. Skipping a little forward, L would then deduce that Morioh has an active killer, someone so effective that it completely erases both victims and evidence. Unlike the Kira case in Death Note, where the victims died of heart attacks, L would have no evidence of how the killings were executed. Some might say that his reasoning for a killer being in town is a stretch, but considering his feats in Death Note, L would most likely arrive at this conclusion. Although in scenario 1, I did flesh it out a bit more from his meeting with Sugimoto Reimi, but we can go for this for now. Moving forward, even without evidence, L would start with the victims, mostly women, vanishing during routine parts of their day. That points to a predator who appears ordinary and safe. The killings spanned 15 years, meaning the culprit must have begun young, placing him now in his 30s to 40s even. The lack of mistakes across such a long period suggests a routine-driven personality who blends into ordinary life, likely as a quiet salaryman or something along those lines. In short, L's profile would land on a solitary, disciplined man in his 30s to 40s who lives a life Kira Yoshikage presents. For L, Killer Queen would look like an invisible weapon of sorts. Objects explode without any bomb or device in sight. Victims disappear entirely, leaving nothing behind. That means there is never any physical evidence to collect, test, or present in court. At best, L can notice patterns, note where Kira is when people vanish, and how often these coincidences line up when he is near said victims. But without something concrete, he can't move to show proof. That doesn't mean L would give up though. Once L narrows Morioh down to a short list of possible suspects, his strategy would almost certainly turn into long-term surveillance. With no crime scenes or forensic evidence to work from, the only realistic way forward is to watch these suspects of men continuously and wait for one of them to act, similar to how he got an FBI agent to tell light. L would likely rotate teams and equipment over weeks or even months, following suspects through their daily routines and ordering them to record everything for L to see, as well as noting who was nearby when new disappearances occurred. This would be a slow process of elimination until the circle tightened on Kira, and I doubt Kira would notice he's being tailed, since even Light in Death Note would not realize it if Luke didn't tell him. And stands don't function like that as well. If Kira is unaware, then the stand is as well. However, the key moment comes when Kira eventually kills again. If surveillance is in place at the right time, due to Kira's consistent habits of carrying trophies and killing ritually, if L managed to catch even one moment of Kira handling a hand before it was destroyed, or a victim is always killed when Kira is nearby, that would finally link one man to the disappearance. But this is a long-term game of patience. L has to wait for Kira to strike and hope his people are close enough to record it before Killer Queen destroys the evidence. But there's also another possible outcome that could happen. One of L's most famous traps is the 64 hidden cameras in Light's room. If L decided to go to the extreme and do the same for every suspect on that list, L's team would encounter Kira's dad and either get trapped or killed, which would boost L's suspicion of Kira even more. At that point, L would face another problem, the method of capture. Because in his mind, he's a killer with an unknown weapon that makes people explode or vanish. Even if L doesn't understand stands, he would classify this as a supernatural or advanced, unexplained ability which changes his approach completely. A standard police arrest wouldn't be safe. The chance of causalities will be too high. That leaves two realistic options. First, L might push for a military or paramilitary unit to isolate and capture Kira alive, knowing the risk but relying on sheer numbers, coordination, and distant weapons. Second is if L deemed Kira too dangerous to risk a live arrest, the evidence of him carrying severed hands could justify a kill order. The strongest evidence he could ever obtain is catching Kira in proximity to a victim when she vanishes, or more definitively, recording him in possession of one of the severed hands he compulsively keeps. That single image will be enough to justify a full-scale arrest attempt even if it doesn't explain how he kills. But this is where the case remains a little fragile. Kira has sheer heart attack, a remote stand that can kill from a distance without tying him directly to the scene. If Kira uses it against someone under surveillance, there would still be no evidence linking the death to him. It will look like a sudden, causeless explosion. L might suspect, but he wouldn't be able to prove it. That means the investigation hinges entirely on Kira's compulsion of trophies. As long as he continues to take hands, there's a chance L's camera or agents catch him before he erases the evidence. Without that slip, the case never leaves the stage of deduction and probability. So, could L actually bring Kira down alone? Realistically, he could narrow the suspect list, build a compelling profile, and even identify Kira as the most likely killer. With enough patience, he might eventually get damning footage of Kira carrying a severed hand, but until that moment, the case is unsolvable by ordinary standards, because every other method of killing Kira employs leaves nothing behind. The hard truth is, without Stan using allies to counter Killer Queen directly, L's best hope is not outsmarting Kira in theory, but waiting for Kira's compulsions to betray him on camera. If that never happened, the world's greatest detective is left with nothing more than suspicion. In the end, this version of the case is only solvable because of the sheer scale of resources L holds. Without constant surveillance team, databases, and funding, Morioh's disappearance will remain an unsolvable mystery. Even then, the very nature of stands make the case nearly impossible to prove in a court of law. So, those are the two scenarios, one where L has the Morioh team at his side and one where he works alone. Both show how difficult the Yoshikage Kira case really is, even for the world's greatest detective. Let me know what you think about these outcomes and about the Kira case as a whole. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.